Sometimes you think you have everything figured out until one Sunday morning changes your entire world. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy my stories, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I'm Caroline. I'm 29 and I work in marketing. 6 months ago, I moved into David's condo downtown. He's 32, works in the software development, and owns this beautiful 2-bedroom place that probably cost more than I'll make in 5 years. The arrangement worked perfectly for me. I covered some utilities, maybe $200 a month, while he handled the mortgage, groceries, and pretty much everything else. Look, I'm not stupid. I knew a good situation when I saw one. David treated me well. I'll give him that. Too well, actually. He was always so eager to please, constantly asking what I needed or wanted. It got annoying sometimes, the way he'd hover around making sure I was comfortable. He'd come home from work with my favorite coffee, or surprise me with dinner reservations I never asked for. Sweet, sure, but also kind of pathetic how hard he tried. Between us, I found his desperation to make me happy a little off-putting. A real man doesn't need to work that hard to keep a woman interested. The truth is, David was safe. Financially stable, emotionally available, ready to commit. Everything that looks good on paper. But paper doesn't make your heart race, does it? He was the kind of guy who remembered anniversaries and planned thoughtful dates, who actually listened when I talked about my day. Most women would call that perfect. I called it settling, because there was Bobby, my ex from 2 years ago, who moved to Seattle for some tech job. Bobby was different, unpredictable, exciting, the kind of man who made me feel alive just by walking into a room. We'd been texting on and off since he left, nothing serious, just keeping in touch. At least that's what I told myself. Deep down, I knew those late-night conversations meant more than casual friendship. Bobby had this edge that David completely lacked. Where David was accommodating, Bobby was challenging. Where David bent over backwards to please me, Bobby made me work for his attention. I'm not proud of it, but Bobby made me feel like I had to earn his interest, and that excitement was addictive. David's constant availability felt weak in comparison. I justified keeping Bobby in my life by telling myself David was too trusting to notice and too naive to understand. The man never even looked at my phone, never questioned where I was or who I was talking to. Part of me respected his trust, but a bigger part found it spineless. A stronger man would have demanded more transparency, would have sensed something was off. David's blind faith in me felt less like love and more like weakness. Living in David's place while maintaining my connection to Bobby felt like the smartest strategy possible. Why give up security while waiting to see if something better would work out? I had a comfortable life, financial stability and emotional support from David, plus the thrill of possibility with Bobby. It seemed like the perfect balance, practical and romantic, safe and exciting. My friends understood this logic completely. Gabrielle, Dean, and Colt had all been encouraging me to keep my options open since I started dating David. They could see what I saw, that David was a good provider but lacked the spark that made relationships passionate. They'd joke about him being husband material in that backhanded way that really meant boring but reliable. When Bobby started hinting about moving back in a few months, my heart jumped in a way it never did with David. We'd been talking more frequently, and I could sense he was testing the waters about us reconnecting. I didn't tell David about these conversations, obviously. What he didn't know wouldn't hurt him, and I needed to see where things with Bobby might lead before making any drastic decisions. Sunday morning, David was supposed to play basketball with his friend, which meant I had brunch plans with the girls at this cute place downtown with outdoor seating. Perfect timing. I needed to talk through my Bobby situation with people who understood the complexity of modern relationships. David kissed me goodbye, all sweet and attentive, like always telling me to have fun and text him when I was done. So trusting, so completely clueless about what was really going on in my head. I got to the restaurant first and snagged us a great table on the patio. The weather was perfect and I was feeling good about life in general. Gabrielle, Dean, and Colt arrived within minutes of each other, and we ordered mimosas immediately. The conversation started light. Work drama, weekend plans, the usual stuff. But I was buzzing with excitement about Bobby's recent messages and needed to share. After our second round of drinks arrived, Gabrielle cut straight to the point. So, what's the deal with you and David? Is this getting serious or what? She had this knowing look like she could sense I had news to share. I laughed, not my normal laugh, but the one I use when I'm feeling particularly clever. Look, he's perfect on paper, right? Good job. Nice place, treats me well. But he's basically my backup plan. The words felt so good to say out loud, so honest and real. Bobby's moving back in a few months. We've been talking. Why give up a comfortable situation while I wait? My friends immediately got it. They clinked their glasses with mine, calling me smart for keeping my options open. Dean laughed and said I was playing the game exactly right, securing stability while staying available for passion. Colt nodded approvingly, saying most women would be too emotional to think so strategically. The validation felt incredible. Here were 3 people who understood that love wasn't just about feelings, it was about timing, compatibility, and practical considerations. David provided security and comfort, but Bobby offered excitement and genuine attraction. Why should I have to choose one or the other when I could have both for now? I kept talking, feeling more confident with each sip of my mimosa. I mean, David's sweet and all, but he's so eager to please it's almost desperate. Bobby never chased me like that. He made me work for his attention, made me feel like I had to earn his interest. That's so much more attractive than someone who's grateful just to be with you. Gabrielle raised her glass again. Girl, you're being smart about this. Keep the stability while you figure out what you really want. No point in throwing away security for maybe. The conversation continued with my friends sharing similar stories about keeping backup options and managing multiple romantic possibilities. I felt so sophisticated, so in control of my romantic destiny. Other women might call it deceptive or unfair, but we understood the realities of modern dating. Men did this all the time. Why shouldn't women play the field strategically? I was mid-sentence explaining how Bobby's unpredictability kept me interested in a way David's consistency never could when I noticed someone approaching our table. My stomach dropped as I recognized David's walk, his posture, the way he carried himself when he was focused on something. He'd heard everything. I could tell by the way he looked at me, calm but distant, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. My friends went quiet as he stopped next to our table, and I felt my face flush with panic and embarrassment. Say, hey! I managed to say, my voice sounding fake and bright. What are you doing here? I came to surprise you. David said, his tone neutral, but his eyes cold. He looked at my friends, then back at me. I'm nobody's backup plan. We're done. The words hit me like a slap. Wait, what? Baby, what are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been yelling. Good luck with Bobby. You won't be waiting for him in my place. He turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving me sitting there with my mouth open while my friends stared after him in shock. I called his name, but he didn't turn around. I watched him get to his car across the street, and the reality of what just happened started sinking in. My friends tried to comfort me, saying he'd overreacted and would calm down once he thought about it rationally. But I could see the doubt in their eyes now, the recognition that maybe our strategic approach to relationships had consequences we hadn't considered. The validation I'd felt minutes earlier evaporated, replaced by a sick feeling in my stomach. I called David immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, explaining that it was just girl talk, that I didn't mean it the way it sounded. No response. I called again and again during the drive home, my panic growing with each ignored call. When I got back to the condo, David was already there, sitting at his laptop with a cup of coffee, like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the way he didn't look up when I walked in the deliberate calm of his movements. David, please, we need to talk about this, I said, setting my purse down and trying to sound reasonable. He finally looked at me, and his expression was completely neutral. Nothing to talk about. I heard what I needed to hear. That's when I noticed my phone had lost Wi-Fi connection. I tried logging into Netflix on the TV, but my account was gone. Spotify, HBO Max, even the streaming services I barely used. All of them were suddenly inaccessible. David had systematically removed me from every account I'd been using, every digital service I'd taken for granted. What did you do? I demanded, my panic turning to anger. You can't just cut me off from everything. My accounts, my passwords, my choice, he said, without emotion. You have until Wednesday to get your things. After that, I'm changing the locks. The coldness in his voice terrified me more than shouting would have. This wasn't the David I knew, the accommodating man who bent over backwards to keep me happy. This was someone I'd never seen before, someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed by tears or manipulation. I tried everything, apologizing, explaining, promising it would never happen again. I told him Bobby meant nothing, that I was just talking nonsense with my friends, that he was the one I really wanted. But David had already moved past listening to my explanations. He'd heard my truth at that brunch table, and no amount of backtracking could undo it. By evening, my phone was buzzing with messages from someone I worked with in the same business park where David's company was located. Grant had texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, mentioning she'd been meaning to ask for a while. I stared at the message, realizing David had probably already responded yes to someone who'd been waiting respectfully in the wings while I'd been playing games. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been keeping Bobby as my backup plan, someone else had been genuinely interested in David, but had respected our relationship enough not to interfere. Now that I'd destroyed everything with my strategic thinking, David was free to explore something real with someone who actually chose him first. Wednesday came faster than I'd expected. I showed up with my mother, hoping her presence might make David more reasonable or at least more polite. Instead, he was completely prepared for us with my belongings already boxed and waiting by the door. Baby, please. I tried one more time. We need to talk. I didn't mean it like it sounded. David kept the chain on the door speaking through the crack. Nothing to talk about. Your stuff's in boxes in the spare room. Take them and go. My mother immediately jumped in, puffing herself up like she could intimidate him. You can't just throw my daughter out. She lives here. She's been staying here as my guest. That arrangement's over. David replied calmly, producing a copy of his lease with only his name on it. She's not on any paperwork. I tried crying, explaining that I'd been drunk and said stupid things that girls just talk differently when they're together. But David had an answer for everything, and his responses made me sound worse, not better. When I claimed I was drunk, he pointed out that my real feelings come out when I drink, which made my confession more honest, not less meaningful. The boxes contained everything I'd brought to his place, which turned out to be embarrassingly little. A few clothes, some toiletries, books, and the throw pillow set I'd actually purchased. Everything else, the furniture, appliances, decorations that had made the place feel like home, belonged entirely to David. I'd been living in his space using his things, contributing almost nothing, while telling myself I was being smart and strategic. My mother tried claiming I'd helped buy various items, but David produced receipts for everything. The coffee table, the bookshelf, the kitchen appliances, all purchased with his credit card, all legally his property. I felt humiliated watching him calmly document how little I'd actually contributed to our shared life. This is abuse, my mother declared, her face red with indignation. Keeping her belongings, throwing her out with no warning. Call the cops if you want, David said, still maddeningly calm. I have receipts and a lease showing this is my property. Take what's hers and go. Loading my pathetic collection of belongings into my mother's car was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I kept trying to engage David in conversation to find some crack in his resolve, but he'd become completely unreachable. The man who used to hang on my every word now treated me like a stranger he was helping move out of his building. As we finished loading the last box, I made one final attempt. Can we at least get coffee later this week? No, he said simply. Come on, David, I love you. He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to him. Then he said, You love having somewhere to stay while you wait for something better. That's not the same thing. The truth of that statement hit harder than I expected. I had loved the comfort, the security, the lifestyle David provided. But had I ever loved him the way he deserved? Had I ever chosen him first the way Grant apparently had? That evening, I started seeing David's social media posts about dinner dates and weekend plans with Grant. She worked in his business park and had apparently been interested for months but respected our relationship. Now she was getting the attention and affection I'd taken for granted. And from the photos, she seemed genuinely happy to be chosen first rather than kept as a backup option. My attempts to reach out to David were blocked immediately. My friends, who'd been so supportive of my backup plan strategy, suddenly became less available when I needed emotional support. Even my mother started questioning whether I'd handled the situation appropriately, asking uncomfortable questions about Bobby, and whether I'd really been fair to David. The worst part was Bobby's response when I finally reached out to tell him I was single. He was polite but distant, explaining that he'd been casually dating someone in Seattle and they'd recently become exclusive. The move back wasn't about rekindling old relationships. It was purely professional. He'd never asked me to wait for him, and he seemed genuinely confused about why I'd built up our text conversations into something more significant. I'd sacrificed a real relationship for a fantasy that existed only in my head. David had been offering me genuine love and partnership while I'd been chasing the memory of excitement that Bobby had never actually promised to deliver. The strategic thinking that had seemed so sophisticated now felt incredibly naive and short-sighted. Watching David's happiness with Grant through social media became a special kind of torture. She posted pictures of them cooking together, going to museums, attending concerts, all the thoughtful, romantic activities David had tried to share with me that I'd found too tame or domestic. Grant seemed to appreciate exactly the qualities I'd dismissed as weakness: his attentiveness, his reliability, his genuine interest in building something lasting. The comments on their photos were telling, too. David's friends and coworkers clearly approved of Grant in a way they'd never quite embraced me. I could see it now, the polite distance they'd maintained when I was around the way. Conversations would shift when I joined groups. They'd probably sensed what David had been too trusting to see, that I wasn't fully invested, that I was keeping one foot out the door. 3 months after that Sunday brunch, I was living with my mother and struggling to afford rent on my marketing salary without David's financial support. My social life had contracted significantly. My friends were less interested in strategic relationship advice now that they'd seen the consequences, and dating had become awkward when potential partners asked about my last relationship. I'd started therapy partly because my mother insisted, and partly because I couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The therapist asked uncomfortable questions about my expectations and motivations, pushing me to examine why I thought I could maintain emotional connections with 2 men simultaneously without consequences. The truth was harder to face than I'd expected. I had been selfish, keeping David as security while pursuing Bobby as excitement. I justified it by telling myself I was being practical, but really, I'd been hedging my bets at David's emotional expense. He deserved someone who chose him first, who was excited about building a life together, who saw his kindness as strength rather than